and welcome to Fiction Fans, a podcast where we read books and other words too. I'm Lily.
And I'm Sarah, and we are so thrilled to be joined by Patty Tavormina, author of Aerovoyant, to talk about her book today.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here.
Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. Before we do start discussing Aerovoyant, a couple of quick intro get to know you questions, starting with probably the hardest one we'll ask you all day. What's something great that happened recently?
Well, I am so excited to be able to announce that I have rhubarb and raspberries growing in my garden. So this is something I've tried to do since like 2000, and finally I'm convinced that I have rhubarb and raspberries growing in my garden. So that's one, but I'm going to give you some more.
Excellent.
Yeah, because it's been a great week here in Southern California. So I'm also happy. I went to poke around Happy Climate News real briefly to see what I can tell all your listeners about things that are going well as regard climate change. And I'm thrilled to tell you that there is a coral reef near Fiji that's recovering. And that tells us that these coral reefs can recover, which makes me very happy. And also, for the first time in Europe, electric cars have outsold diesel cars, which I think is great. And also, I'm happy to report that Greenland has banned fossil fuel exploration. So it's been a good week here.
Those are all very excellent things.
Yeah, holy shit. We don't usually get guests who actually do their homework to tell us like a ton of great things. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Mine is that I made dinner. Not nearly with as broad-reaching significance, but I did get to use lemons from Sarah's garden for when I took a road trip recently and stole some lemons from her, and some beets from my garden. So it felt like a very long-distance collaborative dinner. It was nice.
I don't know if you stole them so much as I threw them at you, begging you to take them from me.
Okay, that too. Sarah, what's your good thing?
So my good thing is that the mama bird that had made a nest and had babies on my back porch came back and had more babies, which is really cute, like seeing the little birds there and hearing them peeping when they want food. It does mean that I can't really open my back door, or I can't get out of my back door. And they have pooped all over the little landing to go downstairs.
I'm told babies do that.
Yep, that's fine. They're cute. That's my good thing.
That is very good.
Yes.
All right. And also, what is everyone drinking this evening? I am drinking frosé, which is rosé blended with frozen watermelon, because it's 97 degrees in Seattle. It's not supposed to be that hot here.
Oof.
That's insane.
Sounds like you need some frosé.
I do. And I get to complain about the weather because it's on topic for this podcast.
That's right. That's right.
Why is the summer getting shorter and hotter every year? Gee.
Well, it's strange that it's in Seattle, that to hear that sort of temperature, at 6:30 in the evening, that's remarkable. So I'm drinking in my book, which we're going to talk about in a minute. I wanted to have tea, but there's something about you're not supposed to have people drinking tea. And I thought, well, I could nerd out about it. So tea is actually made from a plant called Camellia sinensis, I think. So I decided to call my tea Campson from those two names, Campson Brew. So I'm drinking Campson Brew tonight.
I was reading the appendices you included, and I came across that, and I hadn't made the connection. I actually grow the tea plant not very successfully, but I do have some growing in my garden. So I knew what the name was, but I didn't make the connection when I was reading the book until I saw that note in your appendices. And I was like, oh, I love it.
It's so nerdy.
It's great. I am drinking a dram of whiskey because I got an email in my inbox today telling me that it was National Scotch Day or National Whiskey Day. So I was like, I guess the world is telling me that I have to drink whiskey.
I'm sure it was a very hard sell.
Yep.
All right. And one last question. I'll start with the answer is no. Have you read anything other than Aerovoyant lately?
I'm reading some historical fiction right now. I actually I checked out 30 books from the library. I went on one of these massive hauls where I just was like, I'll take this one and this one and this one. I went to 4 different branches, came home with these stacks because I was determined to find titles that it takes me a while to really find a title that I love, but they were all historical fiction. There were a bunch of different authors. And there were 2 that I really love. And I loved them so much. I went to Barnes and Noble and actually bought them. One is called The Great Circle, which tells a fictional story about a woman who circumnavigates the globe in an airplane, but she does it through a polar route instead of, whatever the equatorial route would have been. And the writing's stunning. And then the other one that I just started a couple nights ago was called Arctic Fury. So I guess it's hot here too, because I'm trying to escape to the poles. But the Arctic Fury is about a woman who leads, and I didn't realize that till just now. They're both about women going to the poles. This one's about a woman who leads an expedition to find a lost man. I'm only about 50 pages in, but he's lost up in the Arctic. And they're both really, really good.
They both sound intriguing.
And the Arctic sounds pretty good right about now.
Yeah, it does.
I started reading a novella, The Difficult Loves of Maria Makiling by Wayne Santos. I'm not very far in, but I'm enjoying the writing so far. So
I feel like I've heard that author's name before, but I'm not sure where.
I know he's on Twitter. Maybe you've seen him on Twitter.
Yeah.
Well, the book I did read this week was Aerovoyant by our wonderful guest. So let's talk about that. Now, Patty, when you reached out about doing this collab with us, you mentioned that a lot of the inspiration, that doesn't even quite sound like the right word, but the exigence for this book came from your career as a scientist. And I was wondering if you would tell us a little bit about how that inspired you.
I had a couple different avenues to talk with people as a science, when I worked at Caltech, and then I was also teaching at various universities and colleges in the area. And so I had time to talk with students and talk with colleagues and, all that kind of stuff, which was great. And, it's good to go to conferences and you get all of that very high level kind of, stuff that is really exciting. But it was really clear to me that we were sort of in a loop with one another where we were talking about, either how to, I don't know. I mean, a lot of new research that would be published in journals, which would be read by other scientists, but maybe wouldn't make it out into popular media so easily. And it just seemed to me like with climate change more and more pressing every year, that I wanted to take what I had learned. I was in geological and planetary sciences. So I was just, interacting with all these folks who worked on, it was so cool, everything from earthquakes and seismic zones to methane signatures in the atmosphere, to the deep ocean, to other planets. It was just really cool stuff. So I was able to just bring some of that into fiction and hope that by doing this, that some of the really cool conversations that I enjoyed having would sort of trickle out to new audiences.
That kind of ties into our next question, which is like, you obviously, as you say, you have a very clear message that you're trying to get through in this book. Can you talk a little bit about choosing like a fictional future humanity as the medium for the message rather than setting it on a present day Earth or a future Earth?
Yeah, I had 2 reasons for that. One was that I do see I see fiction set on Earth that deals with climate change. And it's great. It's told either through like a personal journey of loss, or it's sort of told in this dystopic lens of, when the ice caps melt, we're all going to be flooded and we're going to live in a water world or a desert world or something like that. And I felt like I didn't really want to be in that space when I was writing. I felt like I wanted to be back in the past. I wanted to be in the past. I wanted a simple sort of agricultural society. And I wanted to remove the climate topic from the guilt that we feel, because I think that some of us at least feel guilt about, climate change here on Earth. So it becomes hard to approach the topic. Mm-hmm. I felt like by removing it to a different world, maybe it could be an adventure, a nice place to sort of spend time with in our reading mind, and still be able to talk about Earth through the abilities that these people have brought with them from Earth so many thousands of years earlier.
That's actually a really good point about a lot of climate fiction being dystopian. which yours is definitely not. I mean, there are some aspects of
wouldn't call it a utopia either, maybe.
I wouldn't.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, I struggle with that. I don't know what it is. It's sort of post-apocalyptic, but it sort of isn't. So I'm not sure what to call it exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah, but I think you're right when you say that it doesn't exactly fit in with the, I don't know, predominant vision of climate fiction that we see these days, or that I'm familiar with anyway.
Yeah. There were 4, I can't remember all 4, but I know there were 4 sort of, I'm just going to call them lies that the skeptics would talk about. They aren't really lies, but they're like 4 talking points, I guess. And one of them is that carbon dioxide is good for plants. And it drives me nuts when skeptics come out and say, well, carbon dioxide is good for plants, and therefore we should put more carbon dioxide in the air. And, and there were 4 that kept coming up to me. And so I thought, how do I just deal with those 4? So I tried to do that as well, where it's like, okay, we're just going to devote a chapter to, this conversation about CO2 and plants. And we're going to devote a chapter to, whatever it is, burning wood versus burning fossil fuel. And this sounds very awful as I'm describing it, like, that's not a story, but it was sort of part of my process to think about, why did I even want to write this book? And that was a big part of it too. So.
Well, you just answered how you balanced science with storytelling, so I'll skip that one. But going back to the genre, I think a phrase that came up when we were discussing the book was speculative fiction. And I think this is a really fascinating take on, I don't think any of this is a spoiler. What does it look like when humanity gives up on Earth, flees to another planet, and adapts to that new setting, and then almost immediately begins to make the exact same mistakes all over again? But I loved some of the, I guess, genetic differences, especially the way their skin pigmentation changes based on the 2 suns. I think that was just my absolute favorite detail of this new world. It was just so cool. And that's not as, I guess, poignant to the message necessarily as some of the other aspects are that are a little spoilery. But that was just such a fun, aspect threaded throughout the whole story. And every time it came up, I was like, oh yeah, they're kind of purple sometimes.
It was fun. I had fun making people different colors. I thought that was, why not? We have so many colors in nature. Why not? Yeah, one of my sisters kept saying, what color are they? What color are they? And I thought, I don't know. I guess I'll figure it out.
Just almost the seasonality of people's skin tones was, that's not crazy. It's tanning season right now, but it's just the way it is, the timeline is so different for this different planet. I just thought was really fun.
Thanks. Yeah.
We have a question that we're going to ask in the spoiler section about all of the different gene modifications that you include in the appendices, but we don't necessarily see in the story itself. And I'm just going to go ahead and ask it because Lily gave me such a perfect jumping off spot. And I'm going to hope that there's no spoilers, or if there are, we can come back to that question. There is so much world building content, like all of these different genetic modifications, that don't necessarily make it to the page. So what came first for you, the world building or the storyline?
The storyline definitely came first for me. And there was really only the 2 major abilities that are throughout the story that I needed to have in this story. Yeah. And then I thought it wouldn't be realistic to only have 2 genetic modifications. And so then it's like, okay, I'm going to have to make this world a little more robust. And just because we're only learning about this small slice, that gives me room to play in the future. So I think the story came first. Yeah.
How much fun did you have coming up with all of the different modifications?
I'm still coming up with them. Like someone says something, I'm like, that's another one. That's another one. It's like, there are fish who could detect 1 photon of light. That's another one. Every time someone there, there's this blue sea slug, a sea dragon. It's a slug, but it's called a blue sea dragon. It's so cool. It actually lives in the Great Garbage Patch, this is nonfiction. We're back on Earth now, along with all these other organisms that have found a way to make the Great Garbage Patch of plastic sort of a place to be their home. So, which is wild and weird. But these blue sea dragons which are also known elsewhere, they can eat man-o-war, which is a stinging jellyfish. Not only can they eat them, but then they take the stinging cells from the man-o-war and they decorate their entire body with the stinging cells, so that now they have that armor. And I'm just like, I've got to use that too.
Oh, that's so cool.
That's incredible.
Yeah. Awesome.
If you could have any one of the genetic modifications that you've come up with, which one would it be and why?
Oh, that's a really good question. I've never thought about that. There's some that I know some that I would never ever want for sure. Oh, you know what? I think I want the healer's trait, because the healer in my world building had, and this doesn't show up in the first book, I don't think, so this isn't a spoiler. The healers in my world have altered nerve endings. So imagine someone with nerve endings in their hands. When they give you a back rub, imagine that they can detect the strain and stress in your nerve endings. So they know exactly where to pressure, they know exactly what feels good to you. And so they can give this phenomenal back rub. They can reduce your blood pressure. They can modulate your serotonin levels. And this is all through touch. So that's cool. But the reason I would like to have that is because they can also tell when you are being deceitful to them through your galvanic skin response. And I think that'd be cool.
Oh, that sounds really useful for a doctor.
Yes. Yes. Right.
I think if I could have any, I think it would be the one where you can go for several weeks without sleep, if I recall correctly. Because I need a lot of sleep. I sleep an excessive amount. And it would be nice to have those hours back.
Yeah.
Oh, give me all of them. I'll be Superman. Was that was one of the options, right?
You mentioned that there were a couple that you definitely did not want at all. Can you tell us which ones those are?
Yeah, there's one where people just live forever. This is in the news too. And people talk about, how can we modify our chromosomes and our cellular processes so that we never age? And that sounds great. I don't want to age either. But you start to think about what it means to live forever. And I just am like, no, I don't want that. I don't want that.
I think living forever is only fun if your entire family and your friend group are also there with you.
Yeah.
And even then, I imagine that you would stop enjoying it after a certain number of years.
Yeah, I feel like it would be so strange. It's like you go to Disneyland and it's fantastic. You can't wait to do all the rides. But by, 6:30 or 7 or 8 p.m., you're like, I'm done with Disneyland. I feel like that's how life would be. I feel like I don't want, endless centuries of it. But more health would be great, if they can do that with some of the cellular changes that they sometimes talk about doing.
Yeah, I don't know about living forever, but being 20 for 100 years sounds fine.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
We mentioned earlier the footnotes in Aerovoyant for the appendix, but there are also several footnotes in the book that tell the reader about mentioned events that actually have entire stories of their own that can be found on your website. And I was wondering how sort of dependent these stories are on the novel itself, and could this possibly be a way for a reader to sort of dip their toes into the world before jumping into the book?
Definitely. But I'm glad you brought it up, because I've rewritten one of those stories and I'm in the process of rewriting the second of those two stories. And I'm really debating whether to leave those original ones on my website or not. Yes, definitely people could, but they were very sketched out. They were not developed to the same extent that the novel was, but people could read them for sure. And people who have, within my reader group, people who have gone to read the shorter stories separately from the novel, I think they appreciate seeing a little more detail to flesh out the world and all that. You learn a little bit more about the relationships between people and so on. And I should say, too, that they both take place before the novel. So in that sense, they're not at all dependent on the novel because they predate it like a prequel. But if you guys have any idea, it's like, well, what do I do? Do I leave on the website, or do I just stick a note on there saying, if you'd like these, you can email me? I'm not sure what to do. I'm publishing the better versions of them, those are going up on Amazon.
I love the idea of the note and just that process of what an early version looks like compared to a more finished version, I think is really cool.
Oh, that's true. Oh, yeah. So I think you're saying that I should leave them there, but maybe say these are early versions and you can see how this developed. Yeah, that's a cool idea. I like that a lot.
I think it's cool.
Yeah. Sort of archaeological or something.
Before we move on, I realized that we've talked a lot about the climate message in the novel, but not necessarily the actual like storyline, like the plot of the novel. Can you give us a brief summary of what happens, like the elevator pitch for the book?
Yes, the elevator pitch is along the lines of, if we could see carbon dioxide, would we change the way we lived? That's it. But, when we saw smog, we took care of it. And when we saw the ozone hole, we took care of it. When we see pollution, we try to take care of it. So what if we could see carbon dioxide? So that was the elevator pitch. So I have a girl who can see carbon dioxide. I have a young man who can live through Earth history in his mind. And together they are history and science. She ends up being on the run for her ability because the fossil fuel industry doesn't want her to see their emissions.
Shocker.
Yeah, it's crazy. They want their profits, man.
Yeah. I have some very strong reactions to Alphonse and Myrta, but I think we should save those for the spoiler section so I can talk about them all the way instead of just dancing around it awkwardly. So before we move on, Sarah, why should you read this book?
You should read this book if you like science fiction that blends science with storytelling and that has a lot of complex interpersonal relationships. This is definitely the book for you.
Yes, sci-fi based in actual science and not reverse the polarity is always really nice.
Yeah, and I think Patty, you do a really good job at making it accessible to people who don't have a science background.
Thank you. Thank you. That means a lot to me.
To avoid spoilers, skip to 4235.
So, Patty, you mentioned, we talked a little bit about, the world versus the storyline. And I was just wondering, how much do you plan out before you started writing this book?
That's a good question. I think my process is changing. I think with this one, I think I knew it up to the climax, but I didn't figure out really the resolution following the climax.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think, in fact, it's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to go on and on about, and then I had this idea and that, but I had so many ideas. It's like, for a while, I thought they were going to sail off in boats at the end and go to another part of the world because I thought that would be fun. So I had this image in my mind of Alphonse and Myrta on a boat heading off into the sunset. That never happened. So you plan and then it turns out different anyway.
Speaking of scenes that don't happen and surprises when planning, were there any scenes that surprised you that did end up making it into the book rather than the surprise being their omission?
We're in spoilers now, is that right?
We're in spoilers, so you can full on spoil this book.
Okay. Well, I did not expect Alphonse to fall in love with Odile. I really didn't. And the first time they're together, I'm like, oh my God, and I had heard about that this was a thing where your characters do things that you don't expect. So yeah, that totally threw me for a loop. Yeah.
Us too. I will admit, reading the summary of this book, there's a male character and a female character, and they go through this adventure. I was like, well, if there's a romance, it's going to be between them, right?
Yeah. I kept thinking that up until maybe like about the middle of the book or like 2/3 of the way through the book, because like Odile kind of, I don't want to say she rejects him necessarily, but she's very focused on her own goals of getting the truth out about Renico. So I was kind of thinking, well, okay, so they have this fling. She kind of wants to use his connections, and he obviously doesn't want that. He wants to be loved for his own merit. So now they're separated and he's going to fall in love with Myrta.
Yeah. Yeah, I kept expecting those relationships to go differently. And maybe I should have nudged the characters a little bit harder, but I don't know. I think Odile really ended up appreciating, she loved that he was Earth, like he embodied a healthy planet. And that I think was irresistible to her. that was all I could come up with. It's like, why does she love this guy so much? And then as far as for him, he just loves her passion because she is so single-mindedly passionate about doing good in the world, and Murda isn't. So I think, Murda has this power, but she was like, I didn't ask for this. And I feel like that's something that happens too. People sometimes have the ability to make change, and they're, because of their position or resources. And they're like, I didn't ask for this. Why should this fall on my lap to take care of this? And then that's a struggle for them to decide if they're gonna or not. So I thought it was interesting to have Murda be a person who didn't really want to save the world. And then Odile, of course, she has nothing going for her genetic wise. And so she wanted to matter. Yeah.
I really loved the way that Alphonse and Odile's relationship really reveals Odile's character to the reader. She is so passionate and focused and single-minded on her, like, saving the world, frankly. That I never got the feeling that she didn't, well, obviously she does like him, but she's still okay with using him. And that is just such an interesting dynamic, especially from a female character, that sort of almost ruthless pragmatism that I don't think we would have gotten if they hadn't had that sort of relationship growth. And I really loved that arc.
Yeah, it was really strange to play with. And I wondered for a while if Alphonse, I forget if this made it into the book or not, but I wondered for a while as I was writing it, if Alphonse was attracted to her because his mother was ruthless. So maybe he had mommy issues, and maybe Odile struck a chord with him that way.
It can be both.
Yeah, I like Odile a lot. She's broken, but she's broken in a good way,
She definitely goes through some shit. Not that the other characters don't, but I think that she's the most active of them. Like, everything that she goes through is kind of her choice.
Yeah.
Which I appreciated. Like, I appreciated that autonomy in her. She's not just reacting to what's happening.
Yes. Yeah. I think that carries through for her regardless. She keeps making these choices people don't understand. She's a viewpoint character in the sequel to Aerovoyant, which is called Telomeric. And she keeps doing the same thing where she's like, this is what I want. I don't care what convention is. I don't care what people expect of me. I'm trying to figure it out for myself, and I'm going to keep making these choices. So yeah, I like her too.
I thought she was a really wonderful foil for Murda as well. I mean, they're the other girl for each other, right? They had such a strong friendship or relationship, family with their cousins, relationship in their childhood. And then as they've grown up, Odile becomes so active, like just in her fate and also the fate of the world. Whereas Murda is just so reactionary and just trying to save her own skin. And can you blame her? She kind of gets thrown into this with no warning. And I think that is mentioned in the book, that Odile had time to sort of come to terms with the reality of their situation, that they had been switched at birth, which is a wild plot twist, by the way. And so poor Murda feels like she's just trying to play catch up from that point forward.
Yeah. She ends up in this culture where they keep their women it's like, this is your role. You're going to fill your role, and nobody ever questions it because it's out in the middle of nowhere. And you're going to marry this guy, and you're going to have kids. And somehow she's internalized all that and decided that, I guess that's what I'm doing. I guess I'm getting married and having kids. And then this power emerges in her, and she's like, I have no idea. And then people start tracking her, and all bets are off as to how she's going to handle that. But she does. Yeah, it takes her a while to find her agency. I think a lot of people are hungry for that by the time it shows up, but it does eventually show up that she finds her agency and starts to make her own choices about things.
One of the things that's so compelling about the characters, Alphonse and Murda, is that they both go through this kind of journey or this arc of finding their agency, learning to stand up for themselves, but they come to it from very different places. Can you talk a little bit about crafting these arcs to be complementary rather than, the same?
That's interesting. As you're asking that, I'm remembering a big sheet of paper I had where I actually physically drew out, because they are the two viewpoint characters and they alternate chapters. So in that sense, it's very, A, B, A, B, A, B. But I drew out their arcs with their chapters, and I colored in, okay, where are all the plot points? Where is this turn and that turn and this escalation and that escalation? And then I colored them, pink and blue. And there was rejiggering. It's like, okay, these arcs they're not in sync with each other. And so I had to like shuffle things around, which was fine. I mean, it's just part of like restructuring. So that was like one level of the answer to your question, is that it was very physical and visual for me to shuffle things and have the arcs physically drawn out. And then in terms of them coming to it from different perspectives, I think I wanted them both to be sort of compassionate by the end. But I think that, because I think that that's what we all hope for, that we attain, and that our children and everyone, we want a compassionate world filled with compassionate people. And yet we're all so diverse. We all start or are put in different places due to circumstance and background. So Alphonse comes from privilege. Myrta comes from poverty. I don't know that I gave too much conscious thought about that part of it. But I think when you do want both characters to get to the same point, it will end up being complementary in a sense. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it absolutely does. And I loved how they both needed to learn how to stand up for themselves, even though on the surface level, it seems like Alphonse is coming from this place of power, right? He almost has a position in the government that he chooses to reject because he realizes it would be sort of a puppet situation, versus Myrta, who has no assumptions about how much power she has over her life. And then finding out she had maybe more than she thought. They just work together really well. So yes.
That's good to hear. Yeah, I love them. I love these guys. I love my villains. I love all of them. I love Ephraim. I love Ardell. Poor Ardell.
Yeah.
Poor woman. I love her.
Oh, Ardell and oh dear, her name starts with a C.
Celeste.
The other Celeste, yes. Yeah. Just those two mothers are obviously sort of in mirrored situations. But then there's also Alphonse's mother. There's a lot of mothers in this book, all dealing with things differently, and fathers as well. The parenthood in this book is so complex, and we see such different approaches and reactions. How did you craft such dramatically different family dynamics?
I don't know. I think it's a mistake. I will say this. I have 7 sisters. I was raised by a woman. I have no brothers. My father died when I was 6 years old. So for a period of time, it was just the 9 of us women under one roof. And I think that sort of colored how I think about, roles in society. Yeah, it was important to have different characters. You don't want you don't want your characters to be the same. Maybe I leaned into that too hard. I'm not sure.
I just was really struck by how I started off, like, I guess maybe Terrence, Myrta's father, is the best example of this, because my opinion of him was such a roller coaster. He didn't change that much. But the more I learned about the world around him, the more my opinion of him just like went through so many different stages. And how, like, at first he seems fine, and then maybe he's not so fine, but then you compare him to Alphonse's father, who's just not present at all, and maybe it's okay again. A roller coaster. I think what's missing, if I had to critique the fathers or the parents in this book, I think what's missing is a really solid, good father figure. I think that's, I have room for that in a future project. It's so important to me to write strong women, women making choices and women who aren't constrained by societal expectations. Yeah, but that's not just, and my father died when I was 6. So maybe that's part of it too, is that I had a stepfather, but I think he made the right choice in not being too involved with these 8 daughters who he suddenly had, Yeah, it's interesting to think about how to make a good father figure as a character in a book, because that's a wonderful, wonderful kind of character. Well, that's interesting, because I didn't have too much fault with Ephraim. I mean, he obviously makes mistakes, and not great choices every step of the way. But it
Yeah.
feels like he's coming from a good place most of the time.
I don't know. I mean, I agree with you. I think he's coming from a good place, but I got really frustrated with his inability to, I guess, see things from Murda's point of view. And
Mhm.
like, it felt like he was very, in a sense, set in his ways and wasn't willing or wasn't able to talk to Murda in the way that she needed to be talked to and that she wanted to be talked to. And so he withholds all of this information from her. And I got very frustrated on Murda's behalf. I was like, just tell her what she wants to know. Like, you would solve all of these problems if you had a frank conversation with her and treated her as an adult rather than as this child. Because I get that you have all of this guilt from essentially giving her up. But I mean, at some point you have to move on from that.
I agree. Ephraim dropped the ball there.
I mean, yeah, but I don't know. When it's a character in a book, it's very easy for me to say, but he meant well.
He did mean well. He certainly meant well. Yeah. Yeah.
I guess that doesn't matter to Murda so much, but
I understand his choices.
yeah.
I don't blame him for them. He didn't mean well. I just also got very frustrated.
Yeah.
It's also really interesting how Murda is sort of walking into this established family dynamic with no understanding of it.
Yes.
Like
yes.
Odile tried to warn her at the beginning, you have to make them answer you. And Murda didn't quite, or she, I think later says, oh, I should have been pushier. But that's part of her growth. She has to learn how to be pushy. Whereas Odile was raised in this household and has therefore learned how to advocate for herself. And that's just another reason why they sort of mirror each other really well in the story.
Yes. But Odile would not be able to make cheese. She would not.
Oh, that's the thing, right? Like, I could totally see Murda moving with Ardell and Ephraim, but I cannot see Odile moving to the homestead. That I think would be a disaster.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, I think she would have taken 2 looks and said, yeah, I'm out of here. This is crazy.
And good for her.
Yeah.
So you gave us a couple of hints. There's a boat scene that never ended up happening. But overall, how different was this final product to the first draft?
Oh my gosh, I doubt a single word survived because I mean, I have a blog post on my website where I say that it took 42 drafts. It was like I kept redrafting. Mm-hmm. I mean, the first draft was nothing. I mean, Alphonse was there. He was talking to a priest or something. And then he breaks into verse, I think. I mean, it was like, yeah, it was nothing like it. I think the general idea, I think what carried through was I want this young woman who can see carbon dioxide to be the target of the combustion industry. That was solid. That never changed. And then I want this young man who learns what the beauty of Earth through its 4.5 billion years of history. And then it's like, well, where do they travel? When do they meet? Are they friends? Are they not friends? And there was a chapter once. Part of the chapter is still there, but when they're on the caravan, which is all these wagons driving, from one side of the continent to the other, and they stop and there's this lake and Alphonse is off climbing a cliff and Jack and Murda are in the lake. And in one draft, I had Murda actually enumerating how many parts per million of all the different chemicals were in the air. She's explaining to Jack, no, I can count them. There's 460 parts per million of carbon dioxide or whatever it was. And that didn't survive.
She's a pretty fast counter.
She was a fast counter. Yeah. Because, when you're trying to put the science in, you don't know, well, how much do I put in?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll put some in. And then some of it comes back out.
You mentioned that there's a sequel to this book. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yes, I can. Yeah, so this one I wanted to this first one, we deal with atmospheric chemistry and Earth history, if you think of those 2 disciplines in science. And then in the second one, I wanted to sort of approach sustainable energies as a topic and eco-anxiety as a topic. So because that's part of climate change too. Climate change is this big multi-headed challenge that we're facing. It's got all these different angles to it. So I wanted, each book to sort of tackle two elements of it. Here's some science, here's some sociology. It's a planned trilogy. And the third one is going to get into global economics, if you can believe it. And I think ecology. That one is not yet planned out. But the second one deals with eco-anxiety, which is huge, and sustainable energies, which are so important. So those get woven in sort of in the way that atmospheric chemistry and geological history gets woven in through Aerovoyant. That doesn't really tell you what the story is, but it does kind of give you a sense of my planning.
I was going to ask, is it like a direct sequel involving the same characters? Or, well, you said that Odile is a point of view character. So,
yes. Yeah. So some characters, I would say half the named characters are completely new. And we get to spend more time with we spend a lot of time with Jack, who I thought was a great character. And Jack gets married. He marries a nice man named Brutus, and they live somewhere else. And Odile spends time with them. And I like that relationship a lot. Murda is not as present as you might expect. The story takes place 10 years later. It focuses on Odile and her eco-anxiety and what it's like to try to raise a child in a world that is facing this challenge. So she's trying to figure out, do I protect my son from what I know is happening and try to give him the happiest childhood I can, or do I try to prepare him, as best I can? So I think these are real questions that we struggle with. And so it's her journey toward finding a balance between, I guess, sort of selfish preservation and the betterment of all, if I can say it that way. She's trying to figure out how to balance her life, thinking about people around her.
That sounds exactly like Odile.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And it's hard for her. It's hard to figure out. Yeah.
And no, that also sounds heartbreaking. I don't think I'd heard the term eco-anxiety before, but when you hear a word and you're like, oh, that's the word for that. Yeah. I can't wait to read it. It sounds very interesting.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. And then I have a prequel out, which is one of the books that had been on the website. And that one is shorter. It follows Celeste when she was a young woman. And that was a lot of fun to write. So Terrence is actually much more likable in that one than he is in Aerovoyant. He's just a nice young man. And then I'm working on another one that mostly follows other characters elsewhere, but is also a prequel. Yeah, lots of pots in the fire.
Wonderful.
Excellent, because there's so much, it seems like there's so much about the world of Aerovoyant, or the Turisat, is that the name of the planet? Like, yes. It seems like there's so much to explore. So I'm glad that there's a lot of reading material.
Yes, there's a lot. I don't know how useful it is for your listeners to know that I periodically run my novels on sale. And I guess the way to figure out if I'm running any of my books on sale is to check on Twitter. I'm on Twitter a lot, and shoot me a note and I'll let you know when the next sale date is coming up.
Well, that perfectly leads into our last question of the evening,
which is, where can you be found on the internet?
I'm always on Twitter. Every day I'm on Twitter. And my handle is @PL_Tavormina, which is the same as my author name. I also have an Instagram account, which I only check now and then. I have a TikTok account, which I never use. And I have a website, www.pltavormina.com.
And if people want to go out and buy Aerovoyant or the sequel or the prequels,
yes,
best place for that?
Amazon has them all as ebook and paperback. And if you don't wish to support Amazon, then you can buy the paperbacks through any brick and mortar. You can buy Aerovoyant and Telomeric, not the prequels.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been a wonderful conversation. I learned, I laughed. I cried reading the book, not during the podcast, luckily.
Oh, it's been so much fun. I really, 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 really appreciate you guys taking time and visiting. It's so great to connect.
Absolutely. Well, it's been a delight having you on to talk about Aerovoyant with us.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Fiction Fans.
Come disagree with us. We're on Twitter and Instagram @FictionFansPod. You can also email us at fictionfanspod@gmail.com.
If you enjoyed the episode, please rate and review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. and follow us wherever your podcasts live.
Thanks again for listening, and may your villains always be defeated. Bye.
Bye.